The passing of the 19th Amendment was in many ways just the beginning of a new fight towards suffrage. 3/4 of state legislatures still needed to vote in favor of the ratification to officially make the amendment a law. The Women's Suffrage Amendment, written by Susan B. Anthony and introduced to Congress in 1878, was finally passed in 1919, and with Tennessee as the 36th state, the 19th Amendment is certified as law. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the basis of sex. It sounds fairly simple, but actually, the Tennessee vote almost didn't happen. Harry Byrne, just 24 years old and the youngest member of the state legislature, was a self-proclaimed anti-suffragist. He even wore the rose of anti-suffrage on his lapel the day of the historic vote. But fate appears to have stepped in that morning because before he left for the vote, a letter arrived that would change the course of history. The author of that very important note? Harry's mom. She begged him to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification. Harry wore his anti-suffrage rose and carried his mother's note with him when he stood among his fellow legislators for the vote. And when he shouted "aye" in favor of passing women's suffrage, the crowd of fellow legislators were shocked. Before that moment, they all had little doubt as to how the young man would vote. But with one word, he ensured that the Constitution would be forever changed. The next day, he met with members of the press who were desperate to know what had happened. He said, "I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification." The historic vote arrived by train to Washington, D.C., and Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby made sure that the document was secretly transported to his personal home. At 8 a.m., he signed and certified the ratification, alone. The generations of women who had fought for this moment were waiting with anticipation, were completely excluded from witnessing that historic moment. This should have been a moment of foreshadowing, as it certainly reflected a significant attitude towards women actually voting. Many women who attempted to vote that November found that while the law said they could, there were many people who were hell-bent on making it difficult, if not impossible. Anti-suffragists claimed that women would compromise their moral standing or desert their traditional roles completely as they became involved in public affairs. Others claimed they simply didn't have the staff to handle the influx of women voters. And what if, God forbid, they topple the whole system with their wild voting? In an effort to stem the tide, many states began to blockade in alternative ways. They put complicated residency rules into place. They leaned on the strange loophole that stripped women of their U.S. citizenship if they married a foreign national. Many required a poll tax that lower-income families simply couldn't afford to double for both spouses. Some places got even more creative. Philadelphia, for example, required women provide their age before voting, which they saw as a horrifying invasion, and that was enough to dissuade many. While these barriers to voting didn't directly violate the 19th Amendment, they certainly made voting more difficult for all women who attempted. Perhaps no group was more ardently worked against than African American women. While generations of suffragists came from diverse backgrounds, and leaders like Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and many others worked alongside lesser acknowledged but equally influential leaders like Marie Louise Baldwin, Nina Otero Warren, Mary Ann Carey, and Frances Harper. These women are largely forgotten. Their fight reflected their passion for the vote, but also the importance of a broader struggle faced by their individual communities, basic human and civil rights. Even after the ratification of the 19th, they would face blockades to their voting designed to alienate them specifically. Many states required literacy or educational tests. They were required to pay significant poll taxes. They were blocked by outright fraud, and some simply by intimidation or violence. While these tactics were effective in many areas, the voices of leaders like Mary Ann Carey and Frances Harper continued to inspire courage and determination. Both of these ladies had been raised by parents who provided safe haven for many on the Underground Railroad, clearly setting the example that there were some things that were simply worth risking everything for. These women continued to fight for equal pay, job training, childcare options, and educational opportunities for African American women. Asian American immigrants also found themselves unable to stand and be counted after the ratification due to the ineligibility for naturalized citizenship. In fact, they wouldn't gain the right to vote until 1943. Despite that, Dr. Mabel Lee was considered a brilliant speaker and was even asked to ride at the head of the 1912 suffrage parade in New York City. Her excellence was recognized even then at the age of 16. Native American women also found themselves outside of the voting sphere. Many were not made citizens until 1924, and even then, in some states, they remained classified as wards of the state and weren't granted the right to vote until the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Gertrude Simmons Bonin of the Yankton Sioux had been a prominent and dynamic member of the suffrage community and opened up yet another perspective for discussion and attention. She spoke of the importance of gaining not only national citizenship, but also recognition for their tribal citizenship. They saw suffrage as the path to protecting their lands and their communities. Now, ultimately, the suffrage movement may have been a women's movement, but it also highlighted the vastly diverse communities that all called themselves women. However, hopefully beyond the diversity and the complexities of the individual, you're beginning to see that there were many common goals. You see, the 19th Amendment didn't give anyone the right to vote. At best, it signaled a victory in the battle for the rights of women. Generations of women from all walks of life took up the mantle of equality and faced decades of resistance. Their courage, perseverance, resilience, and collaboration should never be minimized. The right to vote should not be taken lightly, as each vote cast stands as a tribute to them.